In the great storm of the Second World War, there were machines that fired, and there were machines that fed. Among the roar of armour and the thunder of artillery, one quiet engine laboured without glamour, yet without pause. It carried bread, fuel, men and ammunition over ruined roads and through the thickest mud of Europe. It was the GMC CCKW, the 2.5-ton 6x6 truck that kept the armies of freedom alive. Built in the millions, it bridged the gap between factory and front line. Its tyres traced the same routes as the soldiers it sustained, its axles groaning beneath the weight of a continent's hope. Drivers called it the Jimmy, a workhorse that could climb where roads vanished and crawl where tanks bogged down. This is its story, the tale of a machine that made victory possible, 1 mile at a time. War is not only won by the soldier who fights, it is sustained by the one who drives. In 1939, as Europe collapsed beneath invasion, the United States Army faced a simple but crippling truth. It could not yet move. Its transport was scattered, a patchwork of light trucks and aging civilian lorries, unfit for the global campaign that loomed. If America was to project its armies across oceans, it needed wheels, millions of them, rugged and identical, capable of carrying war to any frontier. Before Pearl Harbor, military planners already sensed the coming scale. The Wehrmacht had rolled through Poland with mechanized precision, its supply chains flowing behind fast armor. Britain, battered and undersupplied, had learnt that even the strongest defense could falter without fuel, food and ammunition at the front. For the Americans, who would soon shoulder the burden of supplying 2 continents, the answer had to be more than a vehicle. It had to be a system of movement itself. The General Motors Truck and Coach Division was approached with a brief both modest and monumental. Create a standard military truck that could haul 2.5 tons of cargo across terrain where roads ceased to exist. It would require 6-wheel drive, a simple, reliable engine, and a body that could be adapted for every purpose from fuel tank to radio shack. It would need to be built fast, maintained easily, and driven by men with minimal training. And above all, it would have to be replaceable, for war consumes even its best machines. In early tests, prototypes of what would become the CCKW lumbered through Michigan's mud and over the rutted tracks of Fort Wayne. Engineers knew that simplicity was victory. Every bolt had to be standardized, every part interchangeable, so that a mechanic in Normandy could repair what was built in St. Louis. The Army demanded not elegance, but endurance, a truck that could carry a nation's logistics on its back. By 1941, production was authorized. Factories were converted, lines recalibrated, and blueprints stamped by the thousands. From Detroit to Pontiac, the rhythm of industry changed. Machine presses no longer stamped chrome for civilian sedans, but forged steel for a coming crusade. The United States was not yet formally at war, but its engines were already humming with preparation. Then came December. The attack on Pearl Harbor turned theory into necessity. Within days, contracts expanded beyond comprehension. Hundreds of thousands of trucks would be needed. The GMC CCKW, with its 6x6 drivetrain and 2.5-ton payload, became the template for Allied mobility. Every theatre of war, from the deserts of North Africa to the mountains of Italy, would soon echo with its unmistakable growl. It was a paradox of modern warfare. The might of air and armour depended upon an army of humble lorries. For every bomber that soared, dozens of CCKWs carried its bombs. For every tank that advanced, hundreds of Jimmies hauled the fuel and shells that made the advance possible. The war's outcome would depend not just on courage, but on combustion, and on a single truck that could keep the world supplied. In the winter of 1942, as convoys crossed the Atlantic and troops prepared for Operation Torch, the need was no longer hypothetical. Ships like the USS LST 937 disgorged columns of CCKWs onto African beaches, their olive-drab silhouettes cutting through the dust. Each truck was an artery of the Allied body, pumping the lifeblood of logistics through ports, depots, and forward positions. No one cheered them, yet none could fight without them. Behind every headline of victory, there rolled an unending line of six-wheeled ghosts, quiet and tireless. The GMC CCKW was not born from glory. It was born from absence, the desperate need for something utterly ordinary to achieve something utterly extraordinary. To design a truck for total war, one had to think not in luxury, but in logistics. The American military had no patience for beauty. It required geometry, efficiency, and uniformity. The CCKW designation itself was pure function. C for 1941, C for conventional cab, K for all-wheel drive, and W for tandem rear axles. It was not a name meant for newspapers or parades. It was a code, and in that code lay the discipline of an entire industrial system. The vision behind the CCKW was a triumph of foresight over fashion. Engineers at General Motors, working from designs by Yellow Truck and Coach, knew that the battlefield was chaos, and chaos punished complexity. So they pursued simplicity as a virtue. The 270 cubic inch inline-six engine was rugged, underpowered by civilian standards, yet virtually indestructible under abuse. Its three-axle, six-wheel drive configuration gave it both traction and grace in terrain where even tanks faltered. The frame was modular, allowing quick assembly of cargo, tanker, or workshop bodies without redesign. The American Quartermaster Corps, the quiet custodians of supply, understood what few strategists yet grasped, that victory would depend upon speed of delivery, not speed of fire. They envisioned a global conveyor belt, factories in America, ports in Britain, depots in France, all connected by a single type of truck. Each could be maintained with identical parts, repaired by identical tools, and driven with minimal retraining. A single mechanical language for the free world. The concept spread rapidly through the war bureaucracy. Every branch found its own need for the truck. The Signal Corps wanted mobile radio vans. The engineers wanted bridge carriers. The Medical Corps required ambulances. The Air Force demanded fuel tenders. The CCKW became the answer to every question of movement. Where other armies used dozens of models, America would use one pattern and scale it infinitely. By 1942, the philosophy had become doctrine, standardization as strategy. While tanks and aircraft evolved in haste, the CCKW remained stable, its essence unchanged. Commanders called it the backbone of the Red Ball Express, the motor highway that would later feed Patton's advance across France. But even before Normandy, the truck was fulfilling the vision its designers had conceived, turning vast distances into manageable intervals. Its closed cab version, seen in early production runs, offered protection against the elements, but field reports soon demanded change. Open cabs were lighter, easier to produce, and less costly to repair. Canvas replaced steel, form bowed to function. Every inch saved in production meant another truck on the road, another column supplied, another front sustained. The men who drew its blueprints never expected medals. Their contribution was measured in tonnage delivered, not in victories claimed. Yet, behind their drafting tables, they understood that this machine would be more than a transport. It would be a bridge between continents, between industry and infantry, between planning and survival. The CCKW's design was never about innovation for its own sake. It was a mechanical expression of American logistics. It was an answer to a riddle the world had never solved: how to make motion predictable amid war's unpredictability. And in that simple, unwavering goal, its creators achieved something greater than speed or strength. They created reliability itself. In 1943, as production reached new heights, the United States Army adopted a motto for its motorized supply arm: "We deliver." It was modest, understated, and absolute, precisely the spirit of the CCKW, a vehicle without vanity, designed to carry the weight of nations and return for more. When America entered the war, its factories became arsenals, and its workers, soldiers of production. The GMC CCKW was not forged in one place, but assembled in 1,000, each part made by a different hand, each truck born from the rhythm of industry. Detroit, Pontiac, and St. Louis became the new front lines, where molten steel and diesel breath replaced gunpowder and smoke. In the spring of 1942, assembly lines that had once built pleasure cars now produced cargo cabs. Machines that once stamped fenders for Buicks now pressed frames for six-wheel drives. The transformation was total. The nation's engineers spoke one language: output. In factory halls, the air quivered with the metallic percussion of rivets and presses, the heartbeat of mass production. A truck was now a formula, not a craft, and that formula was multiplied endlessly. The CCKW's construction was pragmatic genius. Its ladder frame was pressed from rolled steel, designed to absorb punishment without bending. The drivetrain, built around a two-speed transfer case, channeled torque to all six wheels through a network of differentials that balanced power across uneven ground. The axles were interchangeable, the electrical systems modular, the bodywork adaptable. A single truck could leave the factory as a flatbed and return later converted into a mobile workshop or field kitchen. The K53 shop van variant exemplified the truck's flexibility, a rolling workshop on the move. Within its wooden body were racks of tools, benches, and spare parts. Mechanics could service tanks or jeeps miles from any base. On other lines, fuel tenders like the 750-gallon tanker took shape, their heavy frames slung with cylindrical drums for aviation fuel. Nearby, cargo variants rolled past inspectors with their wooden sides gleaming under fluorescent light, bound for ports in New York and Boston. Women worked alongside men, riveting panels, wiring harnesses, and tightening bolts with pneumatic precision. The workforce had changed. Patriotism was not a slogan, but a shift pattern. Each completed truck bore a small metal plate stamped with its serial number, a signature of anonymity. No one worker owned its creation, but all shared in its purpose. As the months passed, the rhythm intensified. Trains left the Midwest every morning, loaded with olive-drab chassis, wheels stacked like coins, engines crated in cosmolin. They converged on coastal depots where the trucks were assembled, tested, and driven straight onto ships. The process was so efficient that, at its peak, a CCKW could be built, crated, and shipped in less than 5 days. It was not artistry, it was arithmetic on an industrial scale. GMC engineers continually refined the process. Cab assemblies were redesigned for quicker fitting, wiring looms simplified for rapid repair. The open cab variant, introduced mid-war, used less steel and fewer parts, and allowed easier access for maintenance in field conditions. What emerged was not a compromise, but a triumph of adaptation, proof that simplicity could evolve faster than complexity. For soldiers who first saw them in North Africa, the sight of these trucks rolling down gangplanks was unforgettable. They arrived in vast numbers, freshly painted and smelling of factory oil, ready to transform dusty supply columns into organized convoys. Each vehicle represented more than transport. It was proof that American industry could reach across oceans and deliver strength in steel form. The CCKW's build quality became legend. Even under relentless use, its engine rarely failed. Its gearbox, built with a simple 5-speed pattern, could be stripped and repaired in a field tent using only basic tools. Its leaf springs could endure tons of ammunition, bridging equipment, or men without complaint. This was a machine designed for overwork, and it never disappointed. In later years, historians would compare the CCKW to a mechanical organism, self-replicating through the network of its factories. The men and women who built it were seldom named, yet their output became one of the most decisive advantages of the Allied war effort. For every Sherman tank, there were dozens of CCKWs feeding it, fueling it, carrying its shells. The truck did not fight, it enabled fighting. By the end of 1943, more than 500,000 had been produced, each one an identical thread in a logistical web that spanned continents. Wherever Allied troops advanced, the CCKW appeared, a constant presence at the edge of every battlefield, parked behind every column and roaring down every improvised road. Its construction had achieved what strategy alone could not: consistency. It made the chaos of global war quantifiable, measurable, and, for the first time, movable. And so, in workshops lit by the glow of welding torches, the truck that would feed an army took shape. From blueprint to steel, from steel to convoy, from convoy to victory, the build was complete, and the world's greatest supply line was ready to roll. No machine, however well designed, earns its reputation in the factory. The test comes when the world stops behaving as intended, when rain turns to mire, when bridges collapse, and when the road itself disappears beneath the weight of war. For the GMC CCKW, that test began not in the classroom, but in the mud. In the deserts of North Africa, the truck met its first ordeal. The heat scoured its paint, the sand devoured its bearings, and the endless vibration of convoy marches loosened every bolt. Yet the CCKW kept rolling, mile after mile, hauling drums of water and fuel over nothing but wind-shaped dunes. Its straight 6-engine wheezed, coughed, and soldiered on. Drivers learned to trust it more than the compass. As long as the jimmy could climb, they would find their way forward. When the campaign shifted to Europe, a different landscape awaited. France was a country of narrow lanes, deep ditches, and shattered bridges. Convoys wound through villages where the only signs of life were the ruts of wheels and the smell of petrol. The CCKW, built to a pattern of rugged utility, became an adaptable instrument of chaos. It crossed streams, scaled banks, and carried artillery shells to guns hidden in orchards. On icy roads through the Ardennes, its weight pressed the snow into ruts that marked the Allied advance. Where tanks bogged down, the truck endured. One of its most famous trials came during the establishment of the Red Ball Express in August 1944, the massive supply convoy that connected the beaches of Normandy to the front lines surging eastward. With railways destroyed, the entire operation depended on road transport. Over 6,000 CCKWs formed the lifeline, roaring day and night, each loaded with ammunition, rations, or petrol. Drivers, many of them African-American servicemen, worked around the clock, sleeping in their cabs, eating while rolling. The convoy was so constant that locals described it as a living river of trucks. It was not glamour that kept it moving, but the unbreakable discipline of machinery designed for abuse. In the rain-soaked autumn of 1944, the test deepened. Crossing the Rhine demanded improvisation. Roads bombed out, bridges twisted into steel carcasses. CCKWs loaded with pontoons, fuel, and artillery pieces rumbled onto temporary crossings built by combat engineers. Photographs from those days show them straining through floodwater, half submerged yet determined. Every wheel turn was a defiance of physics, 6 tires fighting suction and weight, refusing to stop. When the final bridges held and the Rhine was crossed, it was not tanks that led the way, but supply trucks clearing paths for them to follow. The tanker variants played a quieter role, yet without them no plane would have flown and no tank would have fired. They carried high-octane fuel in thin steel drums, vulnerable to the smallest spark, yet drove through artillery fire to reach forward airstrips and depots. In such missions, courage was measured not by attack, but by endurance, the patience to keep going through fear, fatigue, and fire. In the Pacific, the CCKW faced jungles and mountains, its axles caked in clay, its engine coughing through humidity. Even there it adapted, modified with snorkels, chain tires, and makeshift canopies against the monsoon. American and Allied troops learned to treat the truck as an ally, not an object. A driver could lose everything but his Jimmy and still survive. The truck could pull itself and its crew out of trouble more often than not. And when peace eventually came, the test continued in new theatres. Converted CCKWs appeared in French Indochina, serving local militias and mountain forces. Their American stars were painted over, their olive drab fading beneath tropical sun. Yet the trucks refused to die. Wherever there was a road, or the faint promise of one, they found it and made it passable. The CCKW's performance under duress became legend among Allied logisticians. Reports recorded astonishing service hours, minimal breakdown rates, and engine lives far beyond expectation. One quartermaster noted that it ran until there was nothing left to burn. Such was its nature. An engine without ego, a frame without fear. Each journey, each climb, each crossing proved what the designers had promised and what the war had demanded, that the machine could make distance meaningless. The test had been passed not by brilliance, but by persistence. In mud, in ice, and under fire, the truck never ceased to move. It had no armour, no weapon, and no name that poets would remember, but it had earned a title all the same, the lifeline on wheels. The true breakthrough of the GMC CCKW was not a single battle or campaign, but the moment it proved that supply could move as fast as strategy. In earlier wars, armies had marched until their wagons emptied and then waited. Now, thanks to an unending stream of 6x6s, there was no waiting. The front could run, and the fuel, food, and shells would somehow keep pace. The CCKW made mobility a constant rather than a privilege. In 1943, the island-hopping campaigns of the Pacific began to test this new logistical power. On the decks of ships like the USS LST-449, hundreds of trucks were lashed side by side, bound for beaches that had no names on maps. When the ramps dropped, they did not hesitate. Each truck splashed through surf, found traction, and began the act of war's most invisible triumph, establishing supply before the first base had walls. On the volcanic sands of Bougainville, Guadalcanal, and later Okinawa, the CCKW's tires became the first sign of permanence, a rolling declaration that the Allies were staying. The European front, too, was transformed. By late 1944, the Allied advance had outrun its railways. Every general from Eisenhower to Montgomery spoke of the same constraint: fuel. Armoured divisions were reduced to arithmetic. How many miles could a tank advance on what remained in the drums? The answer, almost invariably, depended on the CCKW. Each truck carried roughly 700 gallons of fuel, and convoys numbering in the thousands ensured that the guns never fell silent for lack of petrol. At times, drivers delivered directly to the front, headlights blacked out, steering by the flash of artillery. They called it feeding the beast. By the time Allied troops crossed into the Low Countries, the CCKW had become as common as the mud beneath it. It carried men to battle, then returned with wounded. It hauled engineers, then hauled their bridges. The Dutch border exercises captured in photographs were not rehearsals for the future. They were proof of mastery already achieved. An army that could keep its roads moving, even under bombardment, was an army that would not stop. When Germany finally cracked and Berlin fell, the truck's utility entered its final wartime chapter. In photographs from May 1945, CCKWs can be seen in the ruined streets, their tires flattened against debris, their cargo beds filled with prisoners, rubble, or supplies for civilians. The war had shifted from destruction to restoration, and still the truck remained indispensable. It cleared barriers, ferried tools, and delivered the first relief supplies into a broken city. Its engines that once roared for battle now murmured through the silence of peace. This was the breakthrough, not an invention, not even a victory, but a transformation of warfare itself. The CCKW proved that modern war could be sustained indefinitely if one could move material faster than it was destroyed. It made logistics an art and endurance a strategy. The weapons might have won battles, but the trucks had won time. When generals surveyed the map of Europe after VE Day, they understood something profound. They had created a war of motion, and the motion had been made possible by a simple lorry. Its reliability had allowed risk, its presence had permitted ambition. The CCKW's shadow stretched far beyond its steel. It was the measure of every campaign's reach. Even the enemy recognized it. Captured trucks were repainted, pressed into German and later Soviet service, used to rebuild what had been destroyed. In post-war Berlin, where streets were still lined with rubble, one photograph shows a CCKW hauling away the stones of a fallen barricade. Its American markings faint beneath a layer of dust, its task now one of repair rather than ruin. It had carried war across oceans and would now carry peace through the ruins. That was the nature of its breakthrough, a machine that transcended purpose, serving whoever had need of movement. By war's end, more than 500,000 CCKWs had rolled from the lines. Each was an unspoken promise kept, that no soldier would fight hungry, that no army would halt for want of wheels. In the steel simplicity of the truck lay the complex miracle of modern warfare, mobility, reliability, and reach. The CCKW had not changed the laws of war, it had rewritten their logistics. Every great success in war carries a shadow. For all the triumphs of the GMC CCKW, the roads it conquered, the armies it sustained, there emerged consequences unseen by those who built or drove it. The machine that had unified the Allied world through standardization would also transform the politics and economies that followed. The truck had made logistics global. Now, logistics would shape peace. As Europe fell silent in 1945, tens of thousands of CCKWs remained scattered across the liberated territories. Some lay abandoned beside airfields or in ruined cities. Others were taken as spoils or gifts to rebuild the very lands they had once invaded. In the east, Soviet forces drove captured GMCs into service. A famous photograph shows Red Army artillerymen entering Krakow in a repurposed CCKW 352, American steel under Soviet flags, a symbol of the uneasy alliance that had carried victory but seeded suspicion. What had been a tool of unity became a token of division, foreshadowing the logistics of the Cold War. In the West, the surplus created its own quiet revolution. Warehouses brimmed with demobilized trucks, engines still warm from service. France, the Netherlands, and Poland acquired thousands through Allied aid and black market trade alike. Farmers bought them, stripped the markings, and converted them into civilian lorries. The same trucks that had carried ammunition now carried timber, milk, and bricks. In their mechanical persistence, the lines between war and peace blurred. Europe rebuilt itself not with bulldozers or tractors, but with the military leftovers of total war. For the men who had driven them, especially the African-American soldiers of the Red Ball Express, the end of the war brought a cruel irony. They had mastered the roads of Europe, delivered victory itself, yet returned home to a country still divided by segregation. Their skill, discipline, and endurance were rarely recorded in medals or textbooks. A machine had given them purpose, but not equality. The CCKW had carried freedom across the Atlantic, but not yet within it. In photographs, their faces remain serious, their hands resting on the same steering wheels that once rolled through the night. Steady, proud, unacknowledged. The industrial scale of the truck's success also changed how wars would be imagined. Generals who had once planned campaigns around distance now planned around supply. The CCKW proved that no theatre was unreachable if the roads could be built and the engines maintained. In the decades that followed, from Korea to Vietnam, this principle would define American warfare. Mobility became destiny, and the ghost of the CCKW haunted every motorized convoy that came after. But with that mobility came dependency. Armies learned to expect endless fuel and spare parts, and governments learned that wars could be fought indefinitely as long as they could keep their supply lines alive. The war machine had learned to feed itself. In making movement reliable, the CCKW had made distance less of a barrier, and therefore made faraway conflicts seem deceptively manageable. The triumph of standardization had an unintended cost. It made war logistically sustainable, and thus perhaps politically easier to begin. Across Europe, meanwhile, the same trucks became symbols of survival. In Warsaw, one CCKW was photographed hauling debris through streets still scarred from uprising and occupation. Its olive paint was scraped and its tires worn to the thread, yet it worked on, a relic of war performing the labour of peace. To the city's civilians, it was not a weapon, but a companion, a dependable machine in a world of uncertainty. The sound of its engine no longer heralded occupation or liberation, but renewal. In time, these trucks seeded industries. Post-war transport companies in France and Italy began with little more than a handful of demobbed CCKWs. Workshops learned to repair their engines, reline their brakes, fabricate their panels. The mechanical literacy of Europe advanced because of a single American lorry that refused to die. It was an unplanned export, industrial competence born from necessity. Yet the most human consequence remained invisible, the bond between men and machine. Thousands of veterans remembered their Jimmy not as equipment, but as a comrade. It had no voice, yet it spoke through vibration and rhythm, through the stubborn reassurance of motion. Many described how they trusted its sound in the dark, knowing that as long as it ran, they were not lost. The truck had taught a generation that resilience could be mechanical, that reliability itself could inspire courage. Thus, the CCKW's legacy was not simply mechanical or tactical, but moral. It reminded the post-war world that strength need not be glorious, that endurance was itself a virtue. But it also warned of a future where movement could become too easy, where the machinery of supply might one day outrun the humanity it served. When the guns finally fell silent, the GMC CCKW refused to retire. Unlike most machines of war, it did not belong to a single nation or purpose. It had been built for destruction, but proved too valuable to discard. From 1945 onward, the Jimmy found new roads in a world rebuilding itself from ruin. In Europe, it became the workhorse of recovery. The same convoys that had once delivered ammunition now brought bread, timber, and cement. Every street cleared, every bridge rebuilt, owed something to those familiar 6 wheels. American trucks became fixtures in the fleets of France, the Netherlands, and Italy, unofficial ambassadors of utility. To the generation that rebuilt Europe, the CCKW was not a symbol of war, but of work. Its olive paint faded to brown. Its engines growled beneath civilian hands. Its military plates were replaced with numbers of commerce. In the new armies forming under NATO, the truck's role endured. Many CCKWs served into the 1960s, refitted with stronger brakes and sealed cabs, hauling fuel, radio gear, or artillery through exercises across the Cold War frontier. In Germany, they were a daily sight on the Autobahn. In Britain, they appeared in depots and training grounds. The same machine that had fed armies in Normandy now sustained the uneasy peace of deterrence. Elsewhere, it took on other lives entirely. Surplus CCKWs were shipped to South America, Africa, and Asia under post-war aid programs. In the highlands of Vietnam, French colonial forces, and later the Montagnard Hill troops, still used them decades after their American debut. On mountain roads cut from red clay, they laboured up slopes with the same patience they had shown in Europe's winters. When newer vehicles broke down, the old GMCs carried on. They were relics that refused to understand obsolescence. For collectors and restorers in the decades that followed, the truck became a legend. Its design, once dismissed as purely functional, acquired a quiet dignity. Clubs formed, parts were salvaged, and enthusiasts began to document each surviving chassis. In Britain, France, and the United States, restored examples began to appear at military vehicle rallies, their engines starting with the same gravelly assurance as in 1944. Children climbed into the cargo beds where soldiers once slept. The machine had outlived its war and become a monument to persistence. The CCKW's engineering legacy was equally enduring. Its modular construction and six-wheel drive system became templates for post-war designs, from the French Simca Unique to the Soviet ZIS 151. Even the concept of a universal military truck, adaptable to dozens of roles, traced directly to the CCKW's blueprint. It had proven that reliability and interchangeability were not opposites but allies. Future vehicles would follow its logic: fewer types, more units, faster repair. In museums, the truck occupies a humble space, usually parked behind more dramatic machinery. Visitors pass it on the way to tanks or aircraft, rarely pausing. Yet curators understand its importance. They know that every other machine in the hall once relied on something like this to arrive where it did. It is the backstage hero of the industrial theatre of war. Photographs from modern rallies capture its second life vividly. At the Oldham Old Time Rally in England, a CCKW rolls past spectators, polished and proud. Children wave, cameras flash, and no one sees the mud, fatigue, and risk it once endured. But its endurance is not diminished by nostalgia. It carries history quietly in its rivets and frame, a record of effort preserved in metal. In an age of automation and electronic precision, the CCKW reminds us of a simpler truth, that progress once depended on human rhythm, hands on levers, feet on pedals, eyes judging distance by instinct. The truck's power was not its horsepower, but its humanity. Every turn of its wheel represented a decision, a hope, a will to move forward. Even today, a few continue to work. In forests, quarries, and farms, a handful of CCKWs still haul loads, their engines rebuilt countless times. They are anachronisms that refuse extinction. To watch one climb a hill under load is to glimpse a fragment of the 1940s, still alive, still performing its duty. Its legacy is more than mechanical. It is cultural. The CCKW taught nations how to coordinate at scale, how to treat logistics as a science, and how to measure progress not in miles conquered, but in miles connected. It turned movement into strategy, a principle that continues to define military and industrial thought alike. And as the decades pass, it remains what it always was, not a symbol of destruction, but of delivery. A reminder that victory depends not on speed or firepower, but on persistence, the quiet art of keeping things moving. There are machines that end wars by force, and there are those that end them by endurance. The GMC CCKW belonged to the latter kind, quiet, dependable, built not for victory parades, but for the long, unseen road that leads to them. When we look upon its rusted frame today, it does not speak of glory, but of commitment, the kind that wears no medal and leaves no monument, yet changes the world all the same. On restoration fields and museum grounds, the CCKW stands once more upon solid earth. Its tyres, worn smooth by time, rest in stillness, but to those who listen, it still hums faintly of distance. You can almost hear the clatter of chains, the groan of suspension, the slow gear changes that once marked the heartbeat of an army on the move. Every dent, every oil stain is a word in the long sentence of its service. Each rivet tells a story of motion, of men who trusted an engine more than luck. There is a paradox in its survival. It was designed to be expendable, yet it outlasted the empires it served. It was built for speed of manufacture, yet it endures as a symbol of permanence. That contradiction is its genius and its quiet poetry. For the CCKW was not merely a tool of war, it was an instrument of connection, linking factories to fronts, people to purpose, and one continent to another. In modern times, its descendants have become digital. Computers track supply, satellites map roads, yet the logic remains the same: motion as life. The CCKW anticipated this truth long before technology could describe it. It taught armies to think in networks, not lines, in flow, not position. What was once a convoy of trucks became, in principle, the model for the world's global logistics, a pattern of constant circulation. In every shipping container, every cargo plane, every delivery truck that follows a route, the spirit of the CCKW still rides unseen. There is also something deeply human in its endurance. The truck did not move on its own. It demanded care, attention, and endurance from those who drove it. The men who wrestled with its stiff steering and heavy clutch were bound to it by necessity, but also by respect. For many, it became a companion, its mechanical heart, beating in rhythm with their own. In moments of exhaustion or fear, its steady vibration was a comfort, a reassurance that movement, however slow, still meant survival. In the liberation parades that followed the war, such as those commemorated each year in Jersey and Normandy, restored CCKWs roll down cobbled streets draped in flags. Children climb aboard to wave at crowds who no longer remember what it cost to keep an army moving. The truck that once crossed ruined bridges now crosses decades, a survivor, bearing the memory of countless anonymous miles. Its silhouette, once commonplace, now carries the weight of an era when men and machines shared endurance as a creed. The thought endures. Progress depends on the ordinary made exceptional through effort. The CCKW did not astonish, it delivered. It did not shine, it endured. And in doing so, it revealed that the foundation of modern civilization, from supply chain to infrastructure, is not glamour, but consistency. It taught that reliability is a virtue, and that sometimes the simplest engineering serves the highest purpose. If you were to climb into one today, smell the faint petrol, and feel the worn seat beneath your hands, you would understand why so many remember it with affection. You would feel its honest weight, the sturdiness of the gearbox, the way the engine coughs once before finding its rhythm. You would grasp, in that instant, the essence of an age when motion was earned, not automated. and as you pressed the throttle and heard the old engine rise, you would sense the echo of every soldier who once did the same, trusting that as long as the Jimmy kept moving, so would hope. The story of the GMC is finally the story of human persistence. It is proof that even in the largest wars, the smallest acts, a gear shifted, a load delivered, a mile completed, can shape history. It reminds us that victory is not only about destruction, but construction, the will to sustain, rebuild, and continue. And though the world has moved beyond the age of convoys and carburetors, the lesson remains clear. Motion, purpose, and endurance still define every journey worth taking. The truck rests now in museums, in collections, and in fields where it no longer needs to prove itself. Its tires are cracked, its paint faded, yet it holds its dignity, as if it knows that time itself has become the road it now travels. The noise of its engine is gone, but its idea endures, woven into every supply line and every act of perseverance. For even when the road ends, the will to move forward does not. The war may have ended long ago, but the lifeline still runs, silent, steady, unseen, along every path where effort meets endurance. And somewhere in that long echo of motion, the GMC still drives on,